Hello, and welcome to this installment in King Arthur Day. Now, throughout the day, we've been primarily looking at the Arthurian tradition in terms of literary texts, and this is to be expected. It really kicks off in a big way with Geoffrey of Monmouth's The History of the Kings of Britain, which we've heard quite a bit about, and several stories progress from there. Several writers contribute their own poems and prose tales, and so in time it develops this great mass of literary works, many of which have their own genius and brilliance to them. And so we might be forgiven for thinking that the Arthurian tradition is primarily a written one or an oral one. But there is also a range of other disciplines and arts within which the Arthurian tradition has had an impact and indeed has been contributed to and has been shaped by. And one of these is the visual arts, things like painting and sculpture. And so in this stream, we're going to try and provide a comprehensive overview and analysis of many of these great pieces that have been a part of this Arthurian legacy. And to do that with me today, I have somebody I'm very delighted to invite back onto the channel. It is my good friend Ferro. Hello, Ferro. How are you doing, sir?
Yes, I'm well. The sun is setting in the sky. It's a beautiful summer's day here, and I'm glad to be on King Arthur Day, excited to talk about Arthurian legends and its art. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, not at all. It's a real pleasure to have you back and talking about something which I think we both have a deep affection for. I guess we maybe a good starting place would be just I've touched briefly on kind of art and its relationship with Arthur, but maybe you could say a little bit more before we get into the actual meat of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's really interesting when looking at Arthur is that it is it's almost like a genre in its own right. It's a series of mythology that has been picked up time and again throughout history in a way that not many other stories have done. Not only that, it's one which spans continents. So obviously, the Welsh would be the first to kind of claim Arthur. The English have a claim to Arthur, the specifically Anglo-Saxons, I mean. The French have a sort of weird claim to Arthur that I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. The Germans feel like they have a strange connection as well, which I'm sure we'll go into. So it's this it's an area. I think it's a literary. It's almost like I said, it's almost like a genre in its own right because it's just been around for so long. It's touched so many people, and because it's got such a wide, vast canon, it's kind of like echoes in a cavern where things are bouncing off the walls and reverberating and interesting in different ways, and people picking some things up, and all of a sudden there's a span of 100 years where nothing happens at all, and then all of a sudden something comes into bloom, and it's almost like a perennial text in some ways. So, like, you know what, the only other similar text I could think of would be something like the Bible, which has obviously been referred to artistically throughout since its conception, and rightly so. But I'm not trying to put it at the same level as the Bible, but certainly in terms of that kind of legacy and span, it's definitely up there.
I think you're definitely right. It has, certainly within Christendom, an almost universal appeal, and you might say it's like the form that becomes adopted across continents or across countries and peoples for the archetypal. So it becomes like the accepted expression across or a universal language for those archetypes or deep ideas which everybody is kind of intuiting about kingship and kingdoms and the cosmological cycles and so on. So I think you definitely hit on something there. I would add the Scots as well. The Scots have a claim on Arthur too. I'm going to stand the Scots here.
You're not okay. Very good. Exactly.
Yes.
Just on the different peoples thing, because every single peoples have their own different view on certain characters and naturally lean into those archetypes a little bit more. So hopefully we're going to explore that. And when I was thinking through this, all the images we've prepared, the history of the kind of artwork of Arthur is a bit like the history of art itself in many ways, because it spans so many different areas and so many different peoples and times and kingdoms. So try and look out for some of those connections, try and look out and see where there's been mirroring or growth. And what's also interesting is how we can still keep it fresh and right into what I would describe as the late modern period. People were putting a spin on Arthur and finding something new. And again, I think it's the truth for all great literary works is that they have power beyond the centuries to be able to talk through time. Again, that's similar to the Bible, where you pick up and read Proverbs and it's like, boom, that makes sense to me in my life right now, even though it's written 2,500 years or whatever ago. So.
Most definitely. And this might be a good point then to introduce your slides here, because you've got a kind of periodization of Arthurian art going.
Yeah, well, I don't want to go too much into this because this is sort of dabbling into the literary section a little bit more. But I do think it's worth lining up and trying to roughly group the texts, because this is one thing I would say as well. There isn't really, I would say, this is where it's different to the Bible. The Bible is canon and then doesn't change, not apart from the Catholics. I won't say anything more on that. But you have these distinct periods of writing on the topic and the mythos at the same time, and each of these periods have different themes, and sometimes new characters are created and new scenes. Sometimes existing ones are changed, and that's why it's a little bit confusing, because I think you may have heard one telling of the story, but actually there's like 10 different versions from 3 different time periods. So what I want to keep in people's heads is, I think I would describe that there are 4 different major Arthurian literary periods, and this is going to affect the art at the same time. And what's interesting about Arthur is that art comes second to the literature. It's one of those areas where you get the writing first and then the art bounces back off it. It's hard to tell how much of the art bounces back into the work later. We just don't know in the same kind of way. But I don't think I think it's definitely top down from the literary sense. My takes are, I think there are 4 different periods. I think you've got this historic early period, which is more factual, with maybe a big exception being the 2 Anglo-Saxon Merlin stories. Basically, like the Merlin stories are very supernatural, very almost like quasi-pagan, which I'm sure you'll talk about in the rest of the day. But it tends to be more about battles and places and people, as opposed to the mythology. Where this changes is in, I think, this kind of romance phase. This is mainly driven by the French, and I think a lot of what we know as the Arthurian mythology gets kind of established there. There's also some really important additional stories that get appended on, and I would say this is where kind of Lancelot is placed at the helm of the mythology. The most French-like knight is brought to the front, unsurprisingly, by the French. Then there is this kind of weird kind of mythic period of reflection, almost outside of, but I would say by the 1300s, you're sort of into the Renaissance, really. Giotto is born. This idea of the knight and knightly virtue is dead in many ways. This is where you've got the kind of aquabus coming in, and so there is almost kind of like a mournful reflection, this kind of more mythic, more kind of like because I think with the romances, knights could see their own stories and see their own lives in it, and they were literally going out and doing quests and other stuff. If you think there were still crusades going on during this period? Well, I think you get more of a kind of a reflected mythology, and kind of like, it's how we look at the British Empire, for example. It's been, it's gone, it's past, and this kind of, we're kind of mythologizing it. Then there is I would say a large gap. There is, I have thought of someone in between this, but we'll talk about it later. But I think there's a large gap, and I think there is a huge amount of writing in the 19th century, specifically between Tennyson and Wagner, basically, that create huge tidal waves and basically inspire another 100 years of writing about Arthur, and put it back into both the elite and just the public consciousness again, in a way. So it's worth talking about it because they put their own touch on it, their own spins. This is, and it's, the 19th century is the Romantic Age. It's specifically, I would say, German Romanticism ideologically, which is affecting people and affecting Tennyson at the same time, but with a definite Anglo twist. So while the Romance period is super French and French ideas and French power, it's this Romantic period is English and it's German, basically.
I think that's I was just going to add a couple of things. I think it's a great overview, and I think the countries work, like the spirit of the countries is definitely embodied in these different eras. And I just wanted to note that the Mythic period, it seems very English, so it's a return to English, and it's almost the elegiac spirit, which might be recovered in the Romantic period as well, to some degree.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted just to make a comment on you've put Welsh nonsense in the historic period, and I think go ahead, Farah.
No, you go first. You go first.
Well, I was just going to explain that in this period, along with the historical text by somebody like Geoffrey of Monmouth, you have these poems essentially which display Arthur as a kind of mythic character who belongs in a world of giants and witches and fairies, and this is kind of the source material for a lot of the Breton troubadours, who will go on to spread Arthur around Europe. So there's although it's not directly tied maybe to the beginnings of the official literary tradition, it does have a somewhat important place within it.
Yeah, I guess my problem with this is twofold. One downside of Arthur and the fact it's tied into nationhood itself is that it becomes like this really annoying vehicle for the worst kind of like petty nationalism at the same time, where people try and claim Arthur and be like, oh, actually, Arthur's this or Arthur's that, and it's most typified by the Welsh, and you literally cannot get an word in Edgeway without the Welsh saying, actually, all like Arthur is a Welsh thing, and etc. And a lot of, if you see modern Welsh nationalism today, whatever, it's all about bigging up their connection with Arthurian traditions. The fact is, certainly from a cultural perspective, you're right in the sense that there is kind of mention of them, but I think their importance in terms of storytelling and in terms of cultural significance is massively overplayed and not really relevant in the whole canon, which will annoy a lot of Welsh people. But I think when you look and see who are the actual writers and what are the actual texts and who are the actual artists, it's basically English, French, and Germans, I'm afraid to say. So I don't mean to be mean, but it's just kind of like we're gonna get some really angry Welshmen in the text saying that their true names, etc. I don't really want to talk about that if I'm honest with you. I just find it really annoying. So this is my kind of revenge against the Welsh for that.
I see. Well, I would just say on that, because I would push back a little bit, but I think it's like there's raw materials there, but they still needed to be transformed into something which is going to last for 1,000 years. And that's what you get with the French romances, for example.
Right,
it's Chrétien takes a lot of Celtic traditions, but they're not these masterworks yet. They're going to be transformed into it, just like Homer built the Iliad out of stories which he's come across, but he transforms them into works of genius. And that's something that the Welsh tradition didn't have at that stage.
if you go to the Arthur page on Wikipedia, you will see about 100 people claiming that they influenced King Arthur because of this story and that story, and it's literally, the guys who on St. George's Day say, oh, actually St. George was a Turkish immigrant knight or whatever. It's exactly that same kind of like stupid text, like everything has an influence from somewhere, so you can't just reduce it up. I believe that
Oh no, yeah.
in the process of creation, certainly between cultures, there is a sublimation or a transformational process that it goes through where it's claimed again. So I'm happy to say that Arthur was talked about in the Welsh text. I'm happy to say that it was an influence, but I will go no beyond there. I just think it's a really boring actually point. So I don't really want to talk about it too much anymore, because I think it just distracts from the interesting thing here, which is the beautiful artworks. But just moving on, I just want to quickly talk through some of the characters as well, so you can get a feel for the creative process itself, because I think this is really fascinating in my mind. A lot actually, we're creating characters all the way up to the kind of mythic period, but really those kind of first two periods spanning around about 400 years are where the majority of the characters of the stories are created. But what I think is interesting about the Romantic period is that you don't necessarily need to create new characters or stories to create something new or create something original or create a different feeling or a different mood on top of it. So I think this tells us a little bit about creation itself. One thing I would say is that you've got these kind of more kind of earthy Anglo-Saxon Brittonic characters like Arthur or Merlin or Guinevere, Mordred, Morgan Le Fay, also known as Morgana in some earlier texts, because people think she's French because of Le Fay all the time. But then a lot of I think the romance adds in some of the best characters and some of the best stories. You got although I would say that even the nature of the romance itself changes the story and the narrative. For example, basically, because it's a romance, if for those, I don't know if you're going to be doing a deep dive into romances, etc. Romances themselves essentially involve in forbidden love, and as a consequence of that, Lancelot has to cuck Arthur, basically. So the entire story changes because of the actual textual format itself. So it's kind of, I do sort of feel bad for Arthur, because all of us, because the French have touched the text, he's all of a sudden got this terrible bad rap at the same time. But anything to say about
then you see then a response within the French tradition in the form of Galahad, who almost is like a reaction against the Lancelot figure.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, he is again the ideal and perfect. The perfect knight in many ways, isn't he? So you are right as well. I just feel like a lot of French probably got I think they felt bad for the concept of the romance itself. Like Dante putting in the lovers who had read about Lancelot and Guinevere into the circles of hell and stuff like that. He was a romantic writer in his early days, and then sort of became more of a moralist in his later years. And I wonder if they were like, maybe we shouldn't have an entire cultural genre about having affairs with people. Maybe that's not such a great idea for the kingdom. Anyway, one thing that's worth mentioning in the Mythics period is about some of the different coloured knights. And I always, you hear about the Green Knight and the Black Knight, etc. All of these different interesting, influential figures. But most stuff happens in those first years. And the other thing to say is that different motifs and scenes appear. And the reason why this is important is that this sort of ties into art, because often art will be showing a specific point, but also a significant point. So again, think about an illustration in a book. You're not going to illustrate, and like King Arthur rode out one day. You're going to do the battles. You're going to do the big the big scenes. You're going to do these important moments. So what are those important moments, and when did they appear? Well, again, actually, some of the biggest moments really happen in the Romantic period. This is the one downside of the historic, is that it tends to be a little bit, I think, a little bit drier and a little bit more factual. While you can say what you like about the French, but they've definitely got a way of creating story and drama. I think, like you said, it's out of that troubadour tradition where they're trying to create entertainment. They're being brought to court to entertain everyone, and just listing off all the information about battles isn't going to cut it. You want to have these kind of amazing moments: the sword and the stone, Excalibur, Merlin and Vivian. These little micro. Also, there's the kind of there's bigger stories, and there's like micro stories within that. So there's so many different things to tell. But again, the majority of the scenes and motifs have been locked down, let's just say, by the end of the Mythic period. Although I did like the I put in the whoso pulleth out his sword of the stone and anvil as right way as king born of all England. The beginning line of you're doing Rick Wakeman, aren't you, for one of the sessions?
Yes, that's the plan. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's the kind of starting line to the album as well. So,
and
okay,
it has on the front cover an anvil as well, actually.
Yeah,
with the sword.
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's actually get into the art. Enough nonsense. One thing I thought was interesting was that the stories and poems themselves almost have this artistic quality. So this is Tristram's, one of the stories of Tristan and Isolde, this, coming in at 1210, and it's poetic. But I don't know if you can see here, for the musically inclined may notice that it's actually got notes on it at the same time. So even though it's poetic, it's meant to be sung in a specific way. And obviously we've got all this kind of lovely illumination. And I think this is a really interesting moment of like the art being the words itself, but it's been transformed into a musical art piece. And it's also the actual illumination itself is really beautiful. And you've got these kind of exaggerated letters, etc. And this was kind of what I would describe as almost one of the earliest forms of kind of artification of the story. But it isn't long before we start to see these kind of illuminated manuscripts, including different scenes and vignettes from the story. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about illumination, but I did what I think was actually a really good explanation of it on the Deepest Lore on AA's channel a while ago, if you ever saw that. But essentially, it comes out of I believe that it comes out of Byzantine traditions through contact, specifically in the First Crusade. I think that the true first part of the Renaissance comes from people coming to Constantinople, coming in contact with preserved art forms. And if you look and see, when do illuminated manuscripts get kind of big again in the West? I think, yes, there are a few people who are preserving them, but as a kind of cultural art form, again, it happens basically after everyone comes back from the First Crusade. Now, in terms of the formats that they're kind of working in, well, the Byzantines are yes, they kind of change things a little bit, but they tended to work in the Roman style, who are kind of their progenitors, who would have these kind of small square-like illustrations to individual works, usually as part of a bigger page. And you can see it's not quite square here, but this little moment from the life of Merlin here, and here we've got Merlin, dressed up in some kind of almost like hair suit here, captured. Now, a couple of interesting things here with illuminations, that they're often trying to explain a story in a picture. So they're going to do away with things like perspective, or I wouldn't say they would do away with it. You can see here they've tried to add like some forms of perspective lines here, but they're also willing to bend the rules to fit story and narrative in, and also to create ornaments, because there's not many of these illuminations in a page, so they want to make them as beautiful as possible. And so you can see here the ceiling's been swapped out for this kind of just like ornamented pattern, but notice that it doesn't match the perspective lines above it. It's kind of almost like being taken outside of that to kind of capture the eye, to create something really interesting. Also, a lot of the illuminations would kind of contemporize the artwork, and this is going to be different to some of the other periods we see. And by that I mean the dress and the attire are all done from the time, and also the different significances of that. So you should be able to tell who a king is versus you can a serf, because the king is wearing a robe here, but also he's got this kind of golden embroidery on here. Maybe this is like a Burgundian style hat at the same time, and he's obviously been kind of assisted by a monk or a priest at the same time, while you can see the kind of burghers or townsmen here in their kind of leggings and socks. So there is this whole kind of language of fashion and that's been brought in to help you understand the imagery. Now, when thinking about this kind of early Gothic period, one may think that it's all about illuminations, but actually what's great about Arthur is, because it's such an interesting topic, that there's a huge amount that's been picked up culturally in other areas. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a romance casket before, Nathan.
No, I haven't. No.
Okay. Casket making, again, is another Byzantine tradition. So again, if you check out the it's the rosette casket in the V&A made in 1060, totally exquisite piece of work. And either because these were so they were brought back from the Holy Land or bought back by merchants, and they were obviously an elite item. Basically, the French started producing them, having been taught, or having brought some kind of low-level Greeks with them. And what's interesting about the Byzantine caskets is they typically tell a story. Interestingly, a lot of them were actually quite were kind of like neoclassical, if that makes sense. They were kind of, even though it was kind of about 1000 AD, they were still looking to kind of Roman stories, while the Franks tended to focus on either Christian themes or their own stories or romance stories. So these caskets are obviously, they're intimate, they're personal, they're carved out of ivory, so they're highly valuable. You would keep your most precious things in here. But there is a kind of a genre of romance caskets where you've got a series of images on the panels. And in this case, it's Tristan and Isolde. And you can see here, for example, here's Tristan with his harp down at the bottom left across here. And then you've got, I believe this has been interpreted as the love potion scene, where they drink the love potion together, presented by the mother at the same time. Makes you really wonder what the casket was for. But I like to think it's kind of like, it's where a knight would keep his lover's locks of hair and favors and reminders of his love, and he takes it with him all the time. So it's a really interesting kind of format of an object. It's functional because you can use the casket, it's meaningful, but it's also it's a narrative object at the same time. And again, just in terms of its form, you can see here this is a total abandonment of perspective. You've got these kind of like castles across here, kind of in flat 2D, but you've got this kind of 3D scene on the inside. Also, with ivory, it's very difficult to do lots of detail. So often they will enlarge heads or make things a little bit more simplified, so you can actually carve it in relief. I would say that this is actually relatively crude in comparison to some of those Byzantine examples I mentioned, but they do get better as time goes on. So there you go, a romance casket. Okay, here's another scene here. So you can tell this is done by, or maybe for the kind of the Frankish or the Norman market here with their kind of kite shields. But I mean, I just love it as an object and something a little bit different at the same time.
In some ways, you kind of alluded to this, it allows the owner of it to reflect their own experience or interpret it through the stories that they're hearing in the courts. So
Yeah,
there's
that's true.
and then so what you were saying at the beginning about in this period, the historic period, the Romance period, that it's a contemporary sort of reality Arthurian legend. You're seeing this in these objects in a very explicit way.
I think you're right, and I wonder whether your kind of knight or baron or whatever would have chosen the scenes on, like he can choose the panels when he's commissioning this and say, oh, I really loved when I heard about it, the story of the love. This guy's you can tell this guy's a lover because he chooses the love potion at the start, he chooses the harp and the romance scenes on the front, but then he's a fighter as well, and he knows that all great love is backed by power, and that the desire, the desire to defend oneself, and so I wonder if we're almost kind of seeing into the mind of the commissioner at the same time. So, okay, back to some more illuminations, and this is again. There's quite a few. Interestingly, quite a few of the early ones were Merlin related. I don't know if that's like a correlation isn't causation thing, but it just happened to be that some of these earlier pieces were Merlin related. Also, interestingly, like there's quite a lot of French works here, but there are also Anglo-French as well. You got to remember this is this is after 1066, so we actually own quite a lot of France still at this point. So there is the connections. We've got a Norman leadership who are also reading romances at the same times. But I do wonder, because of that, I mentioned Merlin as I see him as an Anglo-Saxon character as well. I think that's why some of these earlier pieces get picked up from the life of Merlin. And here he is prophesying to King Vortigern. And I mean, I just love that he's just, you always see in the kind of like almost like the modern jokes when people have like these huge, ridiculously long scrolls with all of their things on it. Merlin literally has the meme scroll, which is absolutely massive here. And again, yeah, you can tell the king because he's got the obviously rod of authority. But again, it's a charming piece, but relatively humble in terms of design. This is very similar. Like you got to see these works as kind of like post-Byzantine at the same time. There is high stylization. I mean, look at the rock that he's on below there is super Byzantine. They're not caring about perspective so much. They're also limited in terms of color palette to like blues, greens, and reds, for example. So it's you're working within a very kind of tight like color landscape at the same time, which restricts you. Oh, just on this, if one of the prophecies is the two dragons fighting, the white dragon and the red dragon, which with the red dragon representing the Britons and then the white representing the Anglo-Saxons, which then conquers the red. Is it any surprise, I think, that Merlin is this kind of Anglo-Saxon character because he basically is like the Anglo-Saxons win and you're the white dragon. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a very kind of like in terms of kind of like a PR and propaganda, it's quite strong.
It is very strong, and then to have Vortigern above the red dragon being Britain's, yeah, it's a very powerful image of this, actually.
Yeah.
Although of course the red dragon is prophesied to return, right? So that's something that might appear later.
Well, this is it. I think they probably didn't focus on that too much, do they? That never gets picked up in the Illuminations, certainly by any of the Anglo-Saxons. Now, the other thing about what I love about this kind of early Gothic period is, yes, they're kind of building from kind of these kind of Byzantine origins, but there is this kind of like freeness at the same time. Again, Ruskin talks about the Gothic imagination, aka the deranged imagination, and I like to think that every English, Welsh, and Scotsman has the same imagination within them, and so you end up with these kind of weird little pieces which are a little bit strange. And again, this you would not see this in a classical piece. This is actually from like a minor romance. It's actually like a Flemish romance, I should say, where after the Grail vision, Gawain sees a flying chessboard, and he sees that as the beginning of his Grail quest. And this is Gawain. I think the Dutchies translate into what whale Wayne. And yeah, he's chasing after a floating chessboard. So I just love this like weirdly Dada-esque surreal moment. You've got this kind of beautiful red background at the same time, while you still got this kind of like Byzantine stylized tree. 0 out of 10 for real, for kind of reality, 10 out of 10 for imagination, and just like pure nuttiness. And it's just a lovely illustration at the same time. Now, I didn't want to focus too much on illustrations, and I think this is one of our kind of first significant pieces that people might have seen beforehand, and this is the Winchester Round Table. Now, this is often assumed to be the King Arthur's Round Table, but interestingly, from research around the dendrochronology, the kind of basically counting of wood rings from the trees involved, it's dated to about the 1250s, which matches up really nicely to these French romances at the same time. But it is an English. It's definitely we know from the tree that it's an English tree and an English round table. And I like the fact that again, this is a lived-in tradition to such a degree that I think it's like Henry II. Henry II saw he read the romance and was like, dude, I am Arthur. I am creating the round table. And he physically created a round table.
It's Edward the First.
Oh, there we go.
And he had several round table feasts throughout his kingdom, including at Winchester. So this was something that he really bought into in a big, big way.
I mean, it's just unbelievably based. Do you know what I'm saying? Just imagine if any of our leaders like read like the Iliad or something, and then were like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to dress up like Achilles," and but you know, but it is kind of LARPy in some kind of ways. But I think you can do it with like an honesty and an integrity at the same time, and I don't mind. I don't mind that as long as you kind of like you're 100% serious about it at the same time. I'm very much a believer of that. Now you may notice the Tudor rose, and this got repainted during the Tudor period with its kind of like own Tudor stamp. But so again, it was kind of like almost defaced in some ways. But I sort of like it at the same time that it was this kind of living object, which then got updated. Where when the Tudors are in power, they're saying, actually, we are the heart of the Round Table. We're the heart of England itself. So it's become like this beautiful living object, and you can see here King Arthur. This is our first depiction of him so far, depicted as this kind of quite jolly man with a beard, sword and orb, with his wrapped in ermine. I mean, he's definitely not a medieval character in this. I'm pretty sure that he was this was the Tudor period, but I mean I love the writing, and can you name all of the knights though? That's the question. I won't ask you to do it now, but
that's the real challenge.
That's the challenge for listeners.
But I guess this idea that he's proceeding from the rose itself, which then roots Arthur in the great houses of England, essentially, of the contemporary period is quite powerful. And then with the lines coming out, it's almost like the sun.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we'll be hearing more about Edward and Henry later in the day, so we'll get a bit more information about this. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Now, I tried really hard to find like random objects which had an Arthur element to it, and I was surprised and shocked to see it as part of these inlaid medieval tiles. Now, I had actually known about these tiles which come from a specific abbey. I think it's like Chester Abbey or something like that. I can't remember. But during the dissolution of the monasteries, they obviously kind of got flattened, and a lot of them ended up in the British Museum. Now, I know a lot about these because these are actually related to textiles, And basically the format of these tile images is known as a roundel, which is kind of like is the premier Byzantine textile format. So if you look at Byzantine textiles, a lot of them have these kind of circle with an image inside, and then a border around the roundel. So I'd seen those, and the reason why I also knew about them is because I think they came from Richard the Lionheart. Basically got in contact with the Normans in Sicily, who had taken over from the Byzantines previously, but had a whole load of Greeks left over. So it's basically England ends up with a whole load of Byzantine-inspired works through the Third Crusade. The other interesting thing about the roundel format is that it was a textile narrative format as well, where there's a very famous, it's known as the Annunciation silk in the Vatican. You'll see a roundel with Mary being announced to by an angel. So what we've done, though, is we've taken this format and then we've sort of contextualized it into one of our mediums, which is tile making, or specifically inlaid tile making. Now, just the way that these are made are the artist carves out on a wood block the design. It's impressed into clay, which creates the kind of impress, and then you pour a slurry of a different colored clay on top, let it dry, scrape it off, and there you have your inlaid tile. Now, you might be familiar with these because they came back in a big way during the Victorian period. But I think these are some of the most exquisite and beautiful narrative tiles in the world. And when you see the detailing on some of these people, this is as good as some of the kind of you got to see it as almost like a wood block print or something like that. It's the same technology. Look at all of the drapery, all of the kind of faces, etc. It's just such high quality, such good quality work, and you only really see it for like 100 years before it goes away. So, and this is all about the story of Tristram. And who do we see across here? We know it. We know it's his Mark and Tristram playing his harp at his feet. So it was cool. I didn't even know that they did a Tristram story within that. But it's a really interesting format to have the story of Arthur on.
It's amazing. It's really incredible. And from what I understand as well, so these are from Chertsey Abbey. So these would have been in. But what's interesting about that is it's like a place where only monks would see them, but yet it's this amazing romance story that they're going to be exposed to every day. So it's kind of an interesting context in which we find them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always think that the monks, a lot of them used to be knights and stuff like that. So it's kind of true, like, yeah. I wonder whether they kind of were like reliving past loves and moments for a second while also focusing on God. Maybe it's hard to tell, but there is actually tons of these tiles showing loads of different stories. But take a look at the Annunciation silk as well, and you'll see this kind of connection in time with other artistic mediums. All right, now as we're entering the kind of 13th century, we're going to see a change in the quality of the illustrations. The work gets way better. We're seeing more stable inks, and so everything gets more colorful. And there's also more, I guess, like less of a Bassano-Roman feel to them, and more of a truly medieval feel, where because a lot of the 12th century guys, 13th century guys would have been taught by Greeks. These are the guys who have been taught for several generations by Westerners, basically. And so Merlin, if we go back here a second here with Merlin's prophecy, he is dressed like a Byzantine, leggings, robe, cloak. I mean, you could say he's dressed like an Anglo-Saxon as well, but it's also like Byzantine tradition. Here he's got this is Merlin as as we know him, as a wizard here. And you've got this kind of beautiful blue robe. You've got this amazing gilding in the background happening. These kind of super vivid red colors. There's still this kind of hyper stylization, like the tree has been. Basically, they needed to fill a space. So rather than just have Merlin floating in this space, like, okay, we need to put something in there. I'm going to put a tree. But because I'm limited to space, I'm going to have to change reality itself. And that's what you find with a lot of the like illuminations of this period and decorative objects. They're restricted for space, and so they kind of warp reality to make it fit. And they kind of have this beautiful tree. There's also something symbolic about the kind of the tree and the life coming from that, and prophecies all about that. The other thing we've got to say is the guy writing it down, dual wielding pens. I mean, just imagine that, going at it left and right handed. What a legend!
Absolute master.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But again, interestingly, another Merlin story again. So I do think that certainly in that kind of Anglo-Norman tradition, Merlin was where it's at. But also, if you go back all the way back to the works and stuff, that's where the more interesting stuff was happening. It was less of a history and more supernatural, and I think that was kind of getting the attention. But we're going to start to see a broader range of stories. We're going to start to see more of these. Like this is more of the kind of romantic period here, and so we're starting to see more about Arthur and his court. Although interestingly, this is just him having supper, no round table. We've also got Lancelot coming into play, and I mean, firstly, we're really starting to see some really beautiful illuminations here. Note, you can see that we've still got this kind of like roughly square image format on the page, but then the page itself has just been like the embellishment going on has increased to like the nth degree. You've got this amazing border. You've got this like little icon block across here, and then it's almost like a surreal landscape. I would describe the background as still quite like Byzantine, these kind of stylized rocks, particularly so. These strange little mushroom trees. But look at the background, it's almost become like a strange textile. But then you've got them pulling I think it's Lancelot slaying another knight, and they've pulled the lance from him, and it's this really beautiful, everything we've seen beforehand has definitely had this kind of Romanesque really feel to it. By the time we're hitting the 13th century, this is medieval 100%. Like all of the kind of clothes and outfits, and the detailing on it is so beautiful. You've got like the use of shadows. It's I think a real great our first truly great graphic work here. Very dynamic at the same time. Look at the horse done in 3/4 view here, with its foot raised up, looking away, and the kind of dying knight here, kind of laid out 1 foot up across there. I think, yeah, really, really lovely. Okay. Speaking of Lancelot, we've got one of my favorite motifs that we'll see a couple of times. I haven't read the story, I have to tell you, but I've seen this a couple of times, and it's really interesting. And it's Lancelot going on the Bridge of Swords, or the Sword Bridge. And it's basically Lancelot crawling across a gigantic sword. So I have no context for this. I think this is part of like one of his quests. But the French absolutely, I mean, like I said, the French particularly love Lancelot, but they really love this. Again, there's something surreal about it. It's both rooted in the living tradition that they're in right now, but it's also about almost kind of this otherworldly quality. Like any of the knights around at that time could have got lost and ended up in this kind of land of giants or whatever for it to be on. You'll also notice the actual format is starting to change, and the illuminators are meddling around. We're not getting those kind of either full page spreads or rectangles. You've got this kind of strange format.
Just to say before we move on, this image is inspired by Chrétien de Troyes' Lancelot, and it's him pursuing after the kidnapped Guinevere, who we can see in this tower here. And he has two options. He can either cross the perilous bridge of daggers, or he can go under on the bridge which is under the ground or underwater. So he chooses this one, but it's an expression of his absolute love for Guinevere, that he's willing to cross a sword, this terrifying, treacherous bridge to rescue her from this land which no man ever returns from. So it's quite a dramatic scene, this, in the story.
Yeah. No, definitely. One thing I wanted to say was about Lancelot as like symbol, and I think his attire is just like very practical. This is what I'm saying. It's really not been mythologized or romanticized. He looks like a knight that is doing service. Do you know what I'm saying? He's just got his mail, his shield, and his tunic. Nothing more than that. And again, you've got the kind of the red stripe here, so you can identify him between pages, etc. But again, I really like this idea of that other knights reading this would be able to. Do you know what I'm saying? Imagine if he was kind of like put in stupid armor that wouldn't work. They wouldn't believe it in the same kind of way. He has to be a practical character. But we'll see that Lancelot does change as time goes on, and we kind of reach this kind of more mythic point.
In many ways, then, he is the expression of the ideal of any knight, then, rather than just a fictional character.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, he's heroic, and you want to read about him and you want to be him at the same time. I think it's very foreign to us because we are in like this age devoid of heroes. Certainly in our culture, where like there is the kind of the trend of sort of rehabilitating villains. That's the age we're in, where like villains are sort of excused their behavior because someone was mean to them as they're a child or whatever. But like even in the 80s, there were like whatever Schwarzenegger-esque. But I think about this. I think about those kind of heroes. It's you weren't meant to be him, if that makes sense. He was always above you. While I think there's something different about Lancelot, where you could go out there and you could be him in a practical and realistic kind of way, which made him very special in the hearts of the elite and the knights of those days. So we've got other funny little scenes, and again, this is some of that kind of deranged imagination that I mentioned about. This is Arthur setting infants adrift in a boat, and you can see this. I mean, it's a surreal moment again. Everyone's been suspended into this kind of like weird other realm with a kind of pattern background, but it's because it's an ornamental work as well as a narrative work. You've got Arthur gathering up the children under his cloak across there, and they've all been placed into this. I mean, compared to Arthur, it looks like it's about 1 meter long, but obviously you can see all of the infants in there. But obviously they're not showing it in a realistic way where you'd have tons of bodies kind of lolling about. It's just the heads, and you can see that we know it's a boat because it's floating in this kind of greenish, rancid water across here. So it is this almost kind of like weird, surreal, like again Dada-esque moment, but also kind of quite beautiful. And again, look at the cloak here. One thing I want to say about the Gothic artist as opposed to the classical artist. The classical artist cares about the form, idealized versions of the form. What I call the real unreal. They focus on things that look real but are like almost unattainable, if that makes sense. That the perfect whole is unattainable in this reality, while the medieval focuses on the unreal real. They make things look like they could be something you see day to day. They're kind of like very commonplace, but there's also, because of the supernatural nature to them, they're also impossible at the same time. So it's kind of like almost like the antithesis to the kind of classical mode, I think. But anyway, like we can see the kind of artistry coming along. Now we've got another one of these boxes, but this time it's a Lancelot box as opposed to a romance box. And again, my favorite scene here, Lancelot on the sword bridge, Lancelot fighting the lion. And I think you can see even within 50 years, there's been a huge improvement in terms of the quality of work that's coming out here. And basically, sort of unsurprisingly, the Franks supersede the Byzantines in terms of quality of these casket boxes, mainly because we sack them. The Latins sack them pretty shortly afterwards. But anyway, 4 scenes. Like, one thing I want to say is, again, you got to think about when thinking about designs on an object, you're heavily restricted to the space, which means that you're having to fit a story to that space, which typically involves either like it's compromise. I feel like today we are just sort of spoiled as kind of artists and creators, because we can do things in so many different ways and have so much freedom. But in some ways, like, freedom is a bit of a curse, because restriction forces you to do certain things, and itself creates a certain style. So I just love this scene of Lancelot on the lion across here. I think this is such an amazing piece of work, where he wants to show the dynamicism of a battle. So what does the artist do? He raises Lancelot's sword up, but it just about fits inside the space here. He puts Lancelot's foot forward to give that kind of energy, and then you've got how do we fit a lion? Well, actually, rather than having him on the ground like a normal lion, we're going to stick him vertically up, almost like he's kind of jumping out. How beautiful is that scene? But then what he then does is combines that with the sword bridge across here. So you've got this mirroring of the sword. Lancelot's sword against the lion becomes the sword of the bridge here at the same time. I think just a really, really beautiful work. Really nice. Okay, we're also going to start to see some other themes coming in, and this is the first sword in the stone piece. And again, the story very, very roughly is Arthur as squire to Hector has to, well, there's different versions of it, but has to kind of rush back to try and find a sword for him, and chances across the sword and the stone, which is in a churchyard, and just picks it up, and then everyone salutes him as king. And you can see here, look at this. This has got to be the cheekiest little Arthur face of all time. I love his little cheeky face here, pulling out the sword. And then they've sort of written this. I don't know if it's intentional, but it just looks like gibberish. And so I kind of wonder if it's kind of like almost like it's not. It's definitely not Latin,
yeah,
or French. So maybe it's kind of like because I think there are different versions of what the writing were. Like I said, that what we know as, I mentioned it at the start, was actually kind of solidified quite late. So I think there is a couple of different versions of what was written on the sword, especially because of the French context as well.
Who was the figure who was next to Arthur there, who's pointing down and then also in his other hand pointing up? Is that Merlin?
I think it's Merlin, basically, because he basically kind of says at that point, he then appears and says, "Oh yeah, by the way, it's Uther's child. I gave Uther's child to Hector to look after, so he is actually the rightful king as well. And look, he's doubly proved it with the sword, and he's pointing to the sword and the stone to kind of show he's legit." We've got his note. I mean, I included this not for the kind of quality of production, because again, I just love the motif of the 2 dragons fighting here, and you've got the red dragon and the white dragon. Interestingly, everyone thinks that dragon have 4 feet. You've been psyoped by Dungeons and Dragons monster manuals. The true medieval believed that a dragon had 2 legs up until like 1450 or something, relatively late. So if you are a hardcore medieval lover, the 2-legged dragon for you or nothing, basically.
Yeah. Does that distinguish it from a worm?
Worms don't exist. Again, this is another psyop. This is another.
Okay.
This is absolute psyop. Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual and its consequences have been a disaster for the fantasy genre. No, yeah, they didn't have it. They just considered it to be a dragon. Although I have a theory about where this itself came from, the two-legged beast. But anyway, that's a story for another time. I also love just a lot of the kind of Gothic artists are very unsubtle with their kind of movements, and you can see here that like Merlin is literally pointing to what's going on, like we need to have that pointed to us. But it is showing the narrative that he is the one that's prophesied that, and he's kind of like, oh, I dreamt of the and the tower falling behind him as well as part of one of his prophecies as well, I believe. So we've got here our first interpretation of Lancelot and Yvain, or Elaine of Astolat, aka Lady of Shalott as well. She is the most named female, and also I would say has the most variety of story. But I basically put her into two pots in my head canon, which is the Lady of Shalott canon, where again she is this woman doomed never to leave her tower in her little island, and she can only look outside via mirrors, and she basically just goes a little bit crazy and then just leaves. And then dies. That's the one story. And there's also the story of her with Lancelot, which again is that's actually one of my favorite motifs, which is kind of like a sort of like a combination of like a love at the wrong time story with almost kind of like a infantile love as well. You know, someone younger looking up to someone older at the same time. So there's that kind of naivety as well. There's an obsession angle to it. The story is that basically Lancelot, as part of his attempts to get affection for Guinevere, takes part in a tournament, gets wounded, ends up. He does it unlabeled, so he doesn't actively. He wants to get the favor of Guinevere, but doesn't want to actively cuck Arthur like in front of everyone else. He just wants to do it stealthily, but then gets wounded, has to run off, and then gets nursed to health by Elaine. Elaine sort of falls in love with him, and he lends her his shield, and then goes off. And then again, there's a couple of different stories because he does get with her in a few stories as well. In Idylls, which is that's my favorite story in Idylls of the King. She doesn't, and ends up basically like killing herself, and then the body and the shield float towards Lancelot. And like I said, there's all these different themes inside at the same time, but I think you don't really see it that much here. This is more of this is what I'm saying. I feel like the romantic Tennyson's view is romantic and it's about the love really, while the Gothic is more pragmatic and it's about the battle, the battles and the fighting and the heroism. And I think yes, there is a bit of he gets the girl at the same time and he's doing it for the love, but it's the fighting happens first, and that's why I sort of wanted to emphasize this. This is very unlike some of the Victorian Romantic works we're going to see, which will focus on the love angle and kind of the sadness and the unrequited love. I feel like the notes being played here are it's violence first, love second, I suppose, and it's the other way around for the Victorian period.
Do you know where that piece was created? Because I just want. Oh, okay, so it's French as well. That's interesting. Because I would have thought that might have maybe tended more towards the love side as well, but this is just maybe a more general period difference rather than country difference.
Yeah, I think it is just like it's like the box here. You know, it's 3 stories of heroism, and then you get the girl. While I feel like other eras is very much like here's 3 stories of love, and then there's a sad like piece of violence as part of it, maybe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We've also starting to get more of these kind of French themes. So we've got the Grail story. I will summarize super quickly. It's Percival and Bors, and Lancelot also tries to go on the Grail quest, and
Galahad.
And Galahad.
Yeah.
The Percival and Bors story is they sort of encounter a like mystical, magical, out of nowhere castle in the middle of nowhere known as the Grail Castle, run by a guy called the Fisher King, and they have to pass a test, and they ultimately fail the test. But spoilers, Galahad passes the test and becomes the new Fisher King in some stories again, although he also fails it in others, which is a little bit confusing. I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan. So
no, I think that was a good, as far as 2-sentence summaries could go. That was the best one I've ever heard.
Yeah, thank you.
Of the Grail stories, yeah.
But
what's going on in this one then?
Yeah, so we can see Percival arriving at the Grail Castle. I think he has to give up his weapons as part of the stories. That's why he's handing over the sword to the Fisher King. And again, you've got this clever use of color here to signify outside here, which is the blue with the red border, to the inside, which is the red with the blue border. And again, this pragmatic use of symbols and space to kind of signify things. On the left-hand side, it's obviously reaching the castle, but on the right-hand side, it's inside the castle itself. But what they've just done is slap a big fat tower in there to signify you are going between these two spaces. But it's a really kind of beautiful symbolic area. And then, sorry.
No, go ahead, Farah.
The test comes, I believe, when the Grail, they go for dinner and the Grail is brought out by the Grail Maiden. And then I can't remember what the actual test is, though. But I think they ask a question or something, and you have to answer correctly. But I can never remember what it is. So
there's lots of different versions, but the Chrétien's version, which seems to have kind of gets carried over, is that Percival fails to ask who is the Grail serving, and it's meant to be the Fisher King. And what's interesting about this image actually is the Fisher King who's taking the sword. Well, the sword's pointing towards his groin. That's where he's meant to be wounded. And if Percival had asked that question, that would have brought about the healing of the Fisher King, and thus the healing of the land, the fertility, I suppose, associated with his groin. So this is all kind of being connected in through this image in quite an imaginative way, I think.
Well, that's it. They're heavily restricted in terms of the number of illuminations you can do. So you have to tell so much story in just a small space. And again, we're sort of we are overindulged with our freedom and what we can do. We can have you can have an illumination on every single page, illustration on every single page if you wanted to. They're not going to have that many. If you look through manuscript, it's like one per double page if you're lucky. So yeah, like you said, the entire Grail story is being told in this one image. And yes, I forgot about the illness and the healing, and that was a great spot. So thank you. No, let's skip this one, because I think we're starting to get to what I would start to say that the kind of High Gothic period. Now, I have something controversial to say about High Gothic, and I basically fundamentally believe it to be really an actual like Renaissance format. Everyone associates the Renaissance with like a return to classicism, but this is really kind of like high Western art with a Germanic sensibility. But what you start to see from the kind of 1350s onwards is we're going to see less and less knights in their mail, and more like louche princes and kind of these kind of rich, well-to-do bachelors. So there's an interesting turn because we're starting to see the end of feudalism, the beginning of humanism. This is kind of like brain over brawns, so to speak, and the type of people who are commissioning these works are more like lovers than fighters. And so we've got, I think this is Tristan and Isolde. I'll need to, I've got the full thing here. I'll look it up while we speak. But
I mean, the text itself has Lancelot just above, so that might be Lancelot.
There you go. It's from the Grail Quest. Yeah, you're right. It's
Right.
Lancelot and Guinevere meeting. But compare this Lancelot to the one we saw like even like 100 years ago. Lancelot in his practical mail and suit, and this is him in his like, again, they just capture the kind of fabrics of the time so well. These are genuinely like contemporary medieval fabrics. They're kind of, the patterns are enlarged a little bit, but it kind of shows these are like genuine kind of cloths of gold, etc. Ermine around the edges, etc. You know, this is like Lancelot as Playboy Prince as opposed to Norman Knight at the same time. Notice how, again, we're getting more realism all of a sudden. You know, those kind of beautiful super stylized trees are making way for reality coming through. But there's much more detail, there's more colors as well. So this we're starting to kind of perfect the illumination format. I also love this kind of leg out. Obviously, the calf is an important area of attractiveness at this kind of period. You know, for the woman, it's the swan-like neck you can see here. It's the big forehead. It's the milky white skin. Are all the kind of signs of a top quality 10 out of 10 lady. For the men, I mean, you can see this guy's got this terrible Zoomer-esque weird but bowl cut, but flaunting his powerful calf muscles is important. And I love the fact he's just going in there for the kiss while you know, he's got his leg extended, showing off his calf at the same time. So yeah, great.
That's Arthur, right? That's tapping him on the shoulder because of the gold.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not sure. So he's kind of like, mate. There's lots of these funny little moments as well, like that, where again it's just like, I think modern sensibilities just think it's just a bit silly and a bit funny. But again, they're trying. What you're trying to see is they're telling an entire story through a picture as opposed to giving you a direct scene, if that makes sense. You know, they're not trying to reflect what's on the paper. Okay, there's interestingly not that many sculptural works, but I did manage to find a couple. And again, they tended to be related to either Lancelot or the Tristan stories, and tend to be in France. So this is in Caen, in the Church of Saint Pietre, roughly 1350. But again, this beautiful Lancelot story in a capital in this Normanesque church here. And you can see, I mean, it's very similar to, in terms of format, to what we've seen with the Illumination. And again, I think that kind of, what's interesting for me is that, you know, different creators and craftsmen and artists were seeing each other's work and sort of reverberating off each other's ideas. So it's kind of like, there wasn't, again, I think nowadays there's less connection between the arts. You know, obviously Morris was trying to bring this back in terms of the artist and the craftsman united together. It very much was in the medieval period, and they would be, you know, this guy has obviously seen in some illuminated work and some attempts at the scene, and has created his own little spin on it. And again, I think what I particularly like about, you know, the advantage that the sculptor has is a couple of things. Firstly, you're doing this in high relief, and that relief allows you to bring in shadow in a way that you can't do in an illuminated work. So how do you create shadow? Well, you create depth, and you cut into the work more. So I just want you to kind of focus on the values here a second. Where are the light points? Where are the dark points? You know, well, who's most illuminated? Well, it's Lancelot. You know, he's the brightest here. He's been lit up constantly, and so our eyes are drawn to him first. Who is also being illuminated? Well, it's this little beautiful the helm of Guinevere in the castle being that he's been kidnapped again. So we're kind of brought to them. But what about the dark areas? Where's the cutting happening? Well, it's below him, and this kind of the sea, giving this kind of menacing, dark feeling, and creating peril. And there we go, got the kind of lion blocking their path. So he's trying to fit in so much in this just tiny little space, and I just love it. It works so well, and it suits the scene, because the scene needs like a rectangle. Think of it, because of the sword. You can't do the format has to be long and thin. So this works for moldings and capitals really well.
And I guess it gives a sense of motion, the actual curvature as well, of to the work.
No, exactly. Almost like we're progressing with Lancelot on his journey as well, and maybe mirroring some of the kind of curves of the waves. One thing I would say is you got this very practical Lancelot again. I like you got to see these kind of cultural works as not. Well, I think there is kind of general flows and moods, but obviously this has kind of been commissioned by that kind of more old school chivalric knight, as opposed to this kind of loose new humanist, nasty little humanist being influenced by the Italians as well. You know, this is commissioned by an actual knight. Now we're kind of seeing the kind of this is the last parts of the kind of romance casket. I mean, I would say that this is a some of the carving on this is really nice. You can see like the kind of Gothic arches here with the I know not quatrefoils, half a quatrefoils at the top there. Really good work. But these are these kind of purely romantic stories. The actual format of the boxes themselves has been changed out of the kind of Byzantine traditions as well, where these are more like, again, giving the kind of cringy D&D references. When you think about a D&D chest or whatever, they actually kind of refer to really like 14th century medieval, with that kind of curved top. I don't know if you can see across there. And this is where your treasure, our idea of a treasure chest comes from. The Byzantine will have flat top, or most of them do, I would say. But again, interesting to see these caskets being made over like 100-year period with kind of romantic notions on there. Now, I managed to find one in the round carving, and this is the story of Tristan and Isolde from the townhouse in Tallinn, in Estonia. And it's this beautiful scene of Tristan and Isolde playing chess. Now, I'm not sure if it's I can't remember whether it's in the story or not, Nathan, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But in terms of motif, the medievals absolutely love the chess moment, and I wonder if it is the kind of discovery of love. Again, I will quickly summarize Tristan and Isolde. It's essentially a story, like a Romeo and Juliet-esque story of forbidden and doomed love, where Tristan, who is sometimes portrayed as a knight of the Round Table, sometimes portrayed as just like the knight of another king, has to fetch the wife of Mark, the King of Cornwall, and ends up either falling in love with her, or drinks a love potion not meant for her, or drinks a love potion anyway, falls in love with her, and ends up getting killed or kills himself, and then she kills herself too at the end, or she gets bored of him in some cases. So this kind of tragic, just think of Romeo and Juliet, this kind of tragic everyone dies kind of moment at the end. And I wonder whether the chessboard, in my head at least, is this kind of moment where he discovers how much he loves her, or something like that. It's a love moment, is how I interpret it. But Nathan, tell me more.
It definitely is, and it's this. I suppose it's also wrestling with the courtly love tradition, which definitely emerges around the time of the literature that we've been discussing, of ladies kind of giving favor to various knights, and the knight would do various deeds to achieve gifts from her, and this might develop into secret trysts. Of course, many marriages at this time were not based on love. And so this kind of tradition of courtly love is suggesting, well, on the one hand, you have this social order, which is maybe bereft of love, but on the other hand, these two star-crossed lovers can come together and have this wonderful ecstatic love. But at the same time, a game of chess has etiquette, it has rules, it has maybe a sense of courtesy to it. And so the two characters are trying to navigate this as well. And I think that's something throughout the Arthurian literature that is a constant wrestling for these knights, like Lancelot, like Tristan, like Gawain in the story of the Green Knight. Is, okay, how do I wrestle with the fact I'm supposed to give honor to my lord, I'm supposed to honor the lady, but I've also got to kind of follow her requests as well, that she wants to love me, and I've got to do it in secret, and it's this intense love, but I've got to be dutiful to my lord in public. So the chess game almost kind of encapsulates all of those things at once.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that really describes it well. One of the only other thing I would add on top is there's the weird equality as well, where they're both players and they're both in the game at the kind of same level. So there is something weirdly, is this where the corruption sets in, Nathan? Rank egalitarianism at this point, because forbidden love is like, there's something equalizing about it, because even though that she's a queen and he's only a knight or whatever, so they're at different social standings, because of their forbidden nature, they're both players of the game at the same level, if that makes sense. So there is something weirdly equalizing to this idea of an affair, I think.
Well, definitely in the courtly love literature of the period, I think it's Capellanus who writes this kind of manual for courtly love. It might be a satire, but even if it is, it's building on ideas. And one of the kind of principles is that a lover can't be with one who they would consider below their status. So the very fact that she would want to be loving a man who is below her status formally, she's giving him an equality, essentially. So I think you're dead on with that.
Exactly. We need to return to everyone's trying to return to Cromwell, and we're trying to return before romances. That's when the corruption sets in. Just in terms of the artwork itself, certainly in the German areas, so like Tallinn, I'm pretty sure would have been under the influence of like Teutonic orders. I'm pretty sure by that period, like they're in Latvia, so they're not too far away. The Germans were especially good at wood sculpture. So again, if you see some of the lime wood sculpture of the kind of high Gothic period, some really amazing works. So it's not surprising that we've got kind of some of our first kind of sculptural pieces coming in from the Germans as wood. You have got Tristan in his kind of like non-battle attire, but I tend to see him portrayed not that much as a knight, if I'm honest with you, and more kind of like the lover, really, a courtly lover. He's often, with his harp. He sometimes has a sword. So, his attire is normal. You've got the kind of beautiful queen. In terms of the kind of structure and layout, it's about mirroring. So you've got this kind of symmetrical tree, which kind of encapsulates them. The tree itself has been stylized where, this is some of the most beautiful foliage you'll see. This, instantly reminds me of kind of carved work you'll see down church pews and aisles and stuff like that. But really lovely foliage. The heads have to be enlarged a little bit just because of, if you want to get the detail on the wood, it's not like stone or ivory. It's much harder to retain kind of detail. So they sometimes have to play around with the actual size of the people for these smaller pieces. It's almost like a semi-relief, really, because I think this is like an end carving. So you can feel the flatness. It's only about 2 inches deep, if that makes sense, or quite wide. But I thought this is a very charming work, and our first chess scene, so kind of look out for more chess. Now, we haven't actually seen that many round tables yet, and this was one of the first ones here. Now, think about some of the kind of first illuminations we saw when we started this, like very, very flat, no colors, etc. But all of a sudden we've got so much detail here, so much going on, so many different colors. We've got yellows, we've got greens, we've got golds coming in, and I think this is a really beautiful rendition of the round table. Couple of interesting things. You've obviously got well, most people have like a crown or some kind of crown on there, which I thought was quite interesting. I'm pretty sure this is the Siege Perilous, the empty seat at the round table, which is going to be destined for Galahad one day. I also love the servants are both diminutive in status, but also in size. They've been turned into these little homunculi dotted around, and in some ways, the knights are giant. And you've got Merlin here. I think this is maybe is this maybe Merlin introducing Galahad, because no, because there's two seats that are missing, aren't there, at the start? I think one is for Lancelot, and then there's the Siege Perilous as well. And I think Galahad gets the second seat. That's my remembrance. Apologies if that's wrong. And I think this is Merlin turning up for that first empty seat, but I could be.
So I think it's like you're almost right, because I think it's a scene from the Quest Song Grail, or the Quest of the Holy Grail in the Lancelot Grail cycle. So we're talking the 1220s or so on, and Galahad appears in that wearing red armor, and he's introduced by a Cistercian monk, and that's quite important, because throughout the whole of it seems like it's been written by a Cistercian monk, that story. And you can tell that because of the white clothing that they're wearing. They were distinctive for their white robes during that period. So it might be a blending of Merlin and a Cistercian monk. I think that.
No, I think you're 100% right. I didn't know that. I didn't know that detail, so that's great.
And you're right. That's the Seat Perilous that's across there that he'll go and sit on in a moment. And the food as well. I should say as well. When the Grail appears, all of the knights get their favorite dish, and I think there's a sense in which that's kind of portrayed here as well.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I mean, I think this is really beautiful. I love.
Yeah.
I mean, the monk. As soon as you said that, it was like, oh, yeah, that's obviously a monk, isn't it? And yeah, I love Galahad and his armor, and there's so many cool details here. Here you can see this is the playing with perspective, where the problem with putting a table into perspective is that you can't show everyone. So think about My Last Supper, where Da Vinci has to put everyone on one side of the table in a really awkward way. You have to have a really long rectangular table. As soon as you put things in perspective, it restricts you at the same time and doesn't allow you to tell you the story in a specific way. What do you do about a round table? You cannot portray that in a perspective and in the whole at the same time without it looking too busy. Well, what do? You put, these two figures here are in sort of perspective here. You can see the kind of the room in the background, etc. But all of a sudden, the viewpoint is tilted up for the table itself. So everyone is down on the medievals, being like, oh, they can't even do perspective. Often it is an active choice to be able to display the story and to they're just pragmatic with it. They for them, reality plays second fiddle to the story itself, and so yes, there's like a innate weird feeling when you're looking at this, a bit of a jankiness, but it's with good reason at the same time. I also love, I don't know if you can see here, the rail. So they've got this kind of beautiful textile at the back, and again, we don't appreciate the kind of role of and importance of textiles in these settings where people would have gigantic wall hangings all the way around that they can change at different times of years depending on the setting. So just imagine Arthur's beautiful table here, and this kind of luxurious fabric all the way around the room. Also, there's another real nice little fabric detail here, which I'll quickly mention. And you can see this kind of white linen with the kind of blue patterning. There is Fabrics coming out of Urbino at that time are known for having this specific white linen and kind of blue pattern marks on it. So, so it shows that the king or whoever's commissioning it had like a sense of taste to know about like rare Italian fabrics that only the elite would have at the time. And we've got extant examples of these very fabrics. So you can go to a museum and see the fabrics that this is based on, which I thought was a really cool little detail.
That's amazing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll put it on Twitter later so people you can just see for yourself. Okay, we've got another Tristan and Isolde here, and again, this is on another capital again. What I love is the Romans and the Greeks would hate to do this, but the Germanic way of thinking is that why can't we have an entire story on the top of a capital, and you've got these really lovely figures. This is really like this is quality Gothic work here. But look at the perspective again. I want you to imagine that you're looking from below, but then think about how the figures have been positioned. You can see that he's sort of sitting down, or like if you were to draw a line out of him compared to this work, it would almost be like horizontal. But the sculptor has positioned the figures so you can see them best when you're looking from down to above. And we often forget that most sculpture is contextual. It was created for a specific place, a specific time, specific circumstance. And so again, if you're looking at this piece, like as we are now, at head height, it looks a little bit strange. You can see the feet of the on the right-hand side across here, a little bit squat. If you were imagine you're looking from a lower point, all of a sudden the perspective comes into play and it all works. So again, I thought this was another really beautiful piece of sculpted work in the Gothic style here. Okay, so we've got a few more pieces. Let me just quickly check and see how much we've got left. Yeah, still quite a way to go for the Gothic section. And we can start to see some of these kind of Grail quests here. So this is Arthur setting out with all the different knights here. And I just think this is just a really beautiful piece in terms of the kind of colours that have been brought in. It's going to be difficult to kind of mark out which knights are who. And I would say that there is no fixed color or symbology language for the knights at this point. So it's quite difficult to work out. For example, if we go to biblical works, Judas is always displayed in yellow, for example, and Joseph is always displayed in yellow, but he's also an old man. Mary is always in blue. So there are these kind of figures you can work out from their kind of color language, if that makes sense. You do not have this in the same kind of way in the medieval period for these stories. So you're relying often on the text itself. I mean, this is basically done in perspective. Apart from obviously they've had to try and fit in these kind of well wishes as the knights head out, and here's Arthur, wishing them the best of luck here. But I think quite a nice little scene. So this is almost kind of similar to some of the stuff we've seen earlier. I wonder whether it's from that same Lancelot book or we've got kind of Lancelot. I mean, according to this, it's Lady of the Lake meeting Guinevere. Do you know much about that story? Because I didn't. I wasn't familiar with it.
I'm not familiar with it either, I'm afraid. No.
That's true. Okay.
But I guess it might be worth just saying as well, because I think a lot of people have the conception that the Lady of the Lake is some kind of water creature or a mermaid or something like that. But as you can see here, she's a woman, and a magical woman, maybe a fairy-like creature, but she is very much a woman. And so the giving of the sword at the lake is just one story connected with her. There's actually several within the various bodies of work.
And she's also not the hand as well, isn't she? The hand is separate to her. And again, that's what confused me for ages, because I thought the hand was. Although I think Tennyson conflates the two. Anyway, I've seen some interpretations where you can see the hand and her, and some where it's just the hand. But okay, more textiles, and this is going to be one of our first like non-literary Arthurian motifs, and I think it's really interesting. And I'm sort of summarizing it as the heroes format. Now we're starting to move into this kind of mythic period here. This is 1400s. This is when, long gone really are those kind of high medieval days. Yes, there are still kind of knights fighting, but it's in a much more, I would say, kind of army focused, a much more kind of professional manner, as opposed to great acts of valor by individuals. And so there is this attempt to create like a little mini canon of important people. And so in this heroes format, you'll see collected 7, 8, sometimes 9, sometimes 12, these kind of important numerological figures, heroes of the past, to reflect in terms of character for today. And for some reason or another, Arthur gets picked up as one of them. So this is one tapestry out of 7. It's in the Met in America, and it's a series of heroes. And the format is you have a hero at the center, some figures related to their life around them. In the heroes format, Arthur is always portrayed as having like the Triple Crown. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if you know anything about the Triple Crown, Nathan, and why Arthur has that.
My guess would be that Arthur conquers. He's the ruler of England, Scotland. Maybe it's Ireland, or it could be France. That would be my suggestion. Okay. But he unites under Great Britain, so he's the ruler, which nobody before him had achieved. And those afterwards will claim. Edward I will say, okay, Arthur was king of Scotland and Ireland, so I should be king of Scotland and Ireland as well as England.
Yeah, interesting. Also, I think what's doubly interesting is that in none of the interpretations of Arthur we've seen so far does he have that Triple Crown. So it sort of springs out of nowhere, but it seems to be tied into this this kind of heroes format, as we'll see in a bit. But again, I really love this. You've got this kind of rendering of Gothic architecture in 3D. Arthur as a central figure, seated, holding his dagger, a little kind of a banner on a spear. A really beautiful and different piece of work. And again, imagine all of them laid out in a long hall. That these are used to create and cover space in a room, in a place, basically. So. Yeah, really interesting.
Is this tied to the 9 worthies kind of idea as well?
Yeah. It's the same thing. I do just call it the heroes. Yeah, the 9 worthies, or the 7 good kings, or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. We haven't had a single fresco yet. There was one in Poland I saw, but I didn't think the quality was good enough to include here. But what I have got is something from a German castle. I mean, this is such an amazing name, Schloss Runkelstein. And I hadn't heard about it beforehand. It looks like this decrepit, weird, like rubbish castle, but it has some of the most amazing frescoes I've seen. And as part of it, it does show the story of Tristram and Isolde in a few different places, not the full story. And this is one of the versions of the story. Tristram, before he knows who Isolde is, gets wounded in battle, but then gets healed by a golden-haired maiden. And one of the, I guess, characteristics of Isolde is that she's kind of witchy. She's kind of supernatural at the same time. She can do healing. She can do herb stuff. This is where people think it's connected to Celtic mythology or whatever, but she's definitely a quasi supernatural. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Nathan.
No, that's right. And just to add to this, in the battle that he's wounded in is typically portrayed as he has slain her betrothed, who was going to be the Prince of Ireland. So that's the context in which he's being wounded as well.
Absolutely cucked. Again, once again, this is such a romantics. Just love stealing the love away. That's brutal.
But then the wound itself, it's suggested that maybe her eyes had already been turned to Tristan before he killed the betrothed. So there is a sense in which he's, it's not just his own king which he's betrayed. He's already stolen Isolde's heart well before that point.
That's cool. That's a good fact. In one of the stories, I heard that he gets healed but doesn't know who she is, and then has to pick her up later, and then it's like, oh yes, I remember you. You saved my life, basically. And you've got this kind of moment of love, moment of heroism, and I think we've lost so many frescoes in England because of the Reformation. You can see a few of them, and I wonder whether we would have had more of these, even in France. If I'm honest with you, just from time, fresco does not last for a long period of time, and it was only really from meticulous efforts. Like the best frescoes are in Italy, of course, but they tend to be made later. They're not really like medieval frescoes. And they were like vigorously looked after by the monks and other people, etc. Well, I think we never respected our frescoes in the same kind of way. But I thought this is really charming, really lovely, and a bit different. Here's Tristan slaying the dragon, and again, that's one of his quests that he has to do. I can't quite remember the context of it. I think he gets wounded again, does he, a second time from the dragon, I believe.
I'm not sure.
No. Note, dragon on 4 legs. By the time we fit 1400s, the dragon purists are crying out. This guy doesn't even have wings or whatever. But again, I really love this. He's grabbed his. It's like this brutal moment of combat. He's wrapped up in the neck, almost like a python or whatever, and he's about to slice the tongue out with a little. That's almost like a sax, like a. Yeah. The kind of curved dagger. Maybe that is a reference to his Brittonic Celtic nature or something, maybe.
But then also, and I guess this is a theme picked up in later artwork. I'm thinking of like the statue of the man and the snake, for example, or Burne-Jones with Prometheus. Is it Prometheus? No, Perseus. Sorry.
Yeah.
The two sides of man. He's intertwined with this serpent dragon being. That he must slay, and then that's connected to winning the woman as well. So that kind of archetype, even this far back, is being shown in the artwork.
No, definitely. This one has a little bit more color in, but again, I just loved it. I thought it was really cool and a little bit different to everything else we've seen. Okay, another piece is. One of my favorite Renaissance frescoes, and this is actually from a I think it's like a hall near Piedmont in the north of Italy, and on one side is a series of 9 heroes, and on the other side are 9 heroines. So again, look at this rank egalitarianism slipping in the Renaissance mind. But I got to say, I love the women on the other side. I don't know if I think I included a photo of them. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I think you can. There you can see them across there. We'll look at that in a second. But who do we see? It's a series of the kind of the best of the best throughout time, and look who's among them. Our triple crowned Arthur across here with the blue with the 3 crowns again. So this kind of reflection on some of the kind of greats. I think this is like Charlemagne, for example, on the right hand side. I can't remember who the 9 heroes are. I mean, here is the actual setup for it. So you've got this kind of great hall. You've got this kind of mimicry of textiles on the bottom as a fresco, and then on one side, on this side, you've got the men. Sorry, there we go. The men are on this side next to the women. All the women are armed as well, by the way. They're some dangerous ladies. I have not been to this place, and I'm determined to go because it just looks so unbelievably epic.
It looks incredible. Yeah. Next Witten.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do a lads tour down there. But I like this idea as kind of Arthur and the Arthurian legend pass away from like practical. This is how to live your life on a daily basis. They're still being retained and pulled out as these kind of like quasi mythological, all-time great kind of figures. But you're not going to live out the Arthurian life in the same kind of way. But you are going to find some of the aspects and kind of how he holds himself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's almost like so being identified with the nine worthies. So you've got like Alexander the Great, Hector of Troy, David, and you can see the harp being one of the symbols here, right? So that's David. You've got Godfrey of Bouillon on the end. So it's like heroes from all of Christendom and pre-Christendom, from the pagan times, the Christians. He's like a manifestation of a cosmological principle or archetype now, as opposed to like a historical.
Yeah,
this is now. Yeah,
that's a great quote, by the way. You got to repeat. What was it? Say that again, Nathan.
I don't.
Cosmological. It was too good. We'll have to clip that.
We'll have to clip it. Yeah. But yeah, so he's becoming more of an expression of that, and people are kind of looking back to that, saying, okay, we need that for today, and we've somehow lost that potentially, that kind of way, and he's been elevated into that level.
Almost like whatever the heroes of Greece who ended up in the stars. It's sort of similar. That we always look upon. No, I think that's a great way of describing it, and I still think that what's good about each of these characters is that they have a bit more kind of context. I think part of their historical nature, part of their mythic nature, is that obviously with David, they've made him look like more Jewish, if that makes sense. So it's and I think that Arthur does look quite English. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a definite style. They're not trying to make everyone look like they're Italian, for example. They're meant to look like where their country's from. You can see that the kind of again David's dusky, more reddish features compared to the pasty Anglo here, or pasty Britain, I should say. So that's part of that mythologizing, is that they sort of become less contemporary in a way where, like Lancelot, despite being a Brittonic knight, was sort of Francified, if that made sense. Yeah, they're kind of going outside of that relationship now. Okay, we've got a few more for this section. So by the time we reach the 1400s, the illumination is starting to die out, if I'm honest with you. We're getting the printing press, which is starting to break through, and that's massively disrupting like the work of illustrators in general, but also the kind of the works that are being produced at the same time. And the quality, you simultaneously have some of the best works during this period from an illumination perspective, but also there's fewer of them, and they basically die out by the 1500s. So this is really a story of the last part. Maybe we'll skip on to this next round table, because this is one of my favorite round tables. Again, this is the Grail, the Grail vision. And I talked about like how do you do the table in perspective? Well, this illuminator has attempted to do it, but he's had to do it by shoving everyone on one side of the table. So again, I think it's it defeats the purpose of a round table, because I'm saying, everyone should be round the table, but they're not. But I mean, I love the expressions here, the kind of the shock, the awe, and then the actual Grail itself, which seems like it's almost encased in a glass cage being lifted up by angels, light, this gilded light firing out from it. So you can see why everyone's like confused and bemused and scared about it at the same time. So yeah, really beautiful, beautiful scene. And again, it shows the attempts at a kind of a more realist view of art itself. Anything to say on that, or should I keep on?
One thing I just thought was interesting is you've got the doorway there showing a little bit of the story before. But
Yes.
It might actually suggest that the man in the middle isn't Arthur, but Galahad, because he draws the sword, a different
As
sword
well,
from
yes.
Excalibur,
Yes. Yeah.
just before the Grail appears, and he is clean shaven. He looks quite young here. So to me, it's like, okay, this is the actual true king who he's in a kind of priestly mode as well. So it's like he's administering almost the Grail in a way. So he's like the true king who mediates between the sacred and the material world.
Also, who's this? You know, this is the guy only lower the crown as well. So I think that's a really good shout out. Great. Okay, we've got another capital here. So this is kind of like high Gothic. This is a representation of the Tristram and Isolde, and again, it is the gaming table again, the chess piece. And again, you can see how these kind of the fashion trends are changed. And again, it's more of this kind of Burgundian style. I mean, in terms of carving, this is like a masterwork, and I want you to really look at the tree across here on the left-hand side. You know, there's really annoying culture Twitter accounts constantly going on. Like if you I swear, if you wait long enough, they'll go on about Canova and, you know, there's kind of artists that depict like silk over bodies and stuff like that. You know, you'll see that from the kind of neoclassical period. Well, I think this work is just as complicated and just as fine, but you can see, look at the kind of the delicate limbs of the tree here, done in the round, but also as part of the base of one, like a column. Also notice this kind of amazing little face popping up and speaking at the same time. So I don't know whether that's meant to be Mark or someone else. A great little moment, but I think this is just a really skillful and beautiful piece of work. So yeah. Okay. This is one of my favorite pieces here, because this is the depiction of Arthur being shown, because Lancelot paints a whole lot of frescoes. I like that he himself as an artist, but he obviously gets with Guinevere and also like paints his dirty work in a fresco at the same time, which is just like, why would you do that? But it's hilarious. And then, I mean, just look at Morgan here. She's just so evil, pointing
She's
with
so
her.
pleased, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then just like, the face of a man. So it's just, all in all, this is the kind of like, it's kind of stupid, it's kind of gawky, but it's humorous. But there is like a real pathos in this work, and maybe a bit heavy-handed. But I really love it as a piece of illumination in terms of, again, just capturing that moment. No one else has ever done this piece. I've yet to see any other work. And again, this is, I was talking about these. Think about these pieces versus the Romantic Age. This is not like a romantic. This is not worthy of a Victorian or romantic painter, if that makes sense, you know. But the Gothic mind just loves this kind of thing, because there's something kind of grotesque about it, and horrible, and sad and tragic, if that makes sense. So I think it really leans into what they're about, but it just doesn't work in the romantic format. So these different motifs are only going to play out at certain times, in certain centuries as well.
I was almost thinking as well, you know, you mentioned Lancelot's a painter, and we were looking earlier at these romance boxes and various artworks which display kind of secret trysts and so on. And this kind of episode probably played out in some respects. A king probably found his wife's romance box that he never gave her, and it's inscribed with Tristan and Isolde. I wonder what this is all about. It feels like this is something which has actually happened too.
No, exactly. I don't think Lancelot as painter is brought up enough as a motif as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, as the premier knight is an artist, is an intriguing kind of connection. He's not just a fighter or a lover. He's an artistic soul too.
Yes, that's really interesting. I haven't really thought about before, but because again, that's not really brought out in the Romantic period as well. But maybe one for the future there.
Maybe one for the future, yes.
Okay. Now we're kind of reaching the kind of, like I said, the zenith of illumination. So you have these kind of this is kind of like luxury, large pull-out pieces here. Again, an attempt to do it all in perspective. Here, finally, we can see everyone kind of laid out properly around the round table, and this one's named as well, so you can even see the different look, this Percival I can see for sure. And I guess, I mean, I'm less keen on this than some of the others we've seen. I think the problem with realism is that it sort of pulls away a little bit from the kind of mysticism and the kind of sacredness and that kind of the true mode of the illumination, which is, like I said, it's meant to be like a vehicle for storytelling, not showing reality, if that makes sense. And this in some ways is my least favorite round table that we've seen so far, but still a lovely piece nonetheless. Also love that everyone's sitting on poofs rather than actual chairs as well. That amuses me. Little boxes.
I love that, and the names are actually on there as well, which is quite a nice touch. Like trying to find a way to do the names without putting it over the grail.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. Yeah, so yeah, you've got them above their heads for the back, and then you can see it on the actual boxes. It's nice. I'll try and get a higher quality scan and have a look through who's who. Okay, we've got a couple of others here as well, just to kind of round out this last section. And we've got Tristan drinking the love potion, and again the chef the chess motif here. Again, this is like, I think, a really nice piece. Really exemplifies what I'm talking about in terms of the illuminated format. We know they're on a ship because rather than showing rigging or nautical themed bits, they are literally placed on an amusing tiny tiny boat that obviously is not functional, but is purely a device to show where they are. On this tiny boat, there are only four people, and you've got this drinking of the love potion. And I just love the expression on the attendant here, and he's like, "Oh, shouldn't have given you that," kind of thing. And this is obviously maybe a version where the drinking of the love potion was an accident. And you've got the kind of I don't know. Isolde's face is quite quite telling. It looks like she's looking at the board. She's also moving her piece. So was it intentional almost by her doing that? I think there's something almost predatory about her figure here. And yeah, love the chessboard. And maybe that is looks like the queen maybe that she's moving as well. So
that's a great spot. Yeah,
the queen moves the queen doing and she's making the first move. Literally, maybe, but there's some ambiguity to it at the same time, and but I think this scene for me feels like Tristan is this sweet little innocent in the grasps of a much more powerful and dangerous woman. So, also love the waves for this as well. I mean, they've been again rendered outside of perspective, and also like in this totally non-realistic, but they kind of reach an almost rhythmical, stylized, like
Mm.
pattern, and just in the same way we saw some like the roof being taken off and replaced with this kind of pattern, they create a pattern effect at the same time through its creation. So
It also is like, amidst this kind of very wild and choppy sea, there is this stillness at the heart of it as she makes a move and he sips from the cup. It's almost like this is the pivotal moment in the story being shown to us in a caption almost. Everything slows down around it.
no, that's a really good point. Yeah, like the waves themselves stop for that. No, I like it. Here is one more interpretation of that. Again, you can tell this is Burgundian because they have the proper princess hats.
Yeah.
They also have these like hilarious like long top hats. The Burgundian hat game is like off the chart basically. But again, this is the drinking of the love potion. This time again, there you can see was it Brigadin or whatever, her servant assaults Tristan, and again, I wonder if that's her mother in the background here, and they're both drinking the love potion. This is definitely more more consensual, I think, than the other one. But again, I sort of like this less. I like the stupid tiny boat more, but this obviously like a larger format where they've got a mast, they've got some guys doing the rigging, etc. So you're getting more of a narrative explanation at the same time. So, but I mean, I still think a very charming piece of illumination. And then I thought would maybe like finish on quite a racy picture here. So apology if we get if we get sense for this, Nathan. But this is Morgan surprising Lancelot and the lovers. I mean, in terms of the actual design and structure itself, look at how realistic the trees have become, how naturalistic the land has become. You've got the sense of perspective at the same time. So we have kind of fully reached this idea of realism over stylization, and all attempts at the Byzantine form have gone by this period. But again, you still have this very heavy-handed, people pointing to stuff and kind of highlighting stuff across, like that's clearly obvious at the same time. That seems a little bit so silly to us.
I guess the one thing I would add to that though is they haven't noticed her, which is quite an interesting detail. Like you would expect if somebody was walking past you like that, you would see, but they're so enraptured. So when she goes to tell Arthur, they're still none the wiser. They think their tryst is still secret. So
Yes.
it brings an even greater kind of tragic moment for them when it is all outed by her.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I do really love the eyes actually, and across the figures here, where they're just so enraptured, they're like looking at each other so intensely at the same time. So, I think we often think of medievals as these exceptionally prudish, unerotic group of people, but I think they're not. I wouldn't describe them as like a sexy sexy form of eroticism that you would see in something like Rubens, for example, who is just kind of like he's kind of like flesh out kind of eroticism. But there is a real deep passion and sexual energy to a lot of their works, and just even the idea of the romance novel itself being this kind of this love affair. It's operating in this very harsh environment and harsh world of war, but at the same time, and so there are these kind of rules. You're not going to see flesh, and you're not going to see like a bare breast in the same kind of way that you would see in like 100 years time in like high Renaissance works. But I think stuff like, again, the passion in the looks and the feelings between the people are even greater. It's just a very different kind of eroticism at the same time. So, like I said, I think we kind of downplay and are quite negative to them. in almost similar to how we think about the Victorians. We say, oh, the Victorians are all prudish, but actually I think they're a very sexually charged age and time, but it's in a very specific way and within a framework that is unfamiliar to our laissez-faire, everything out kind of way, if that makes sense.
Well, I would add to that as well. The actual concealment of it in public allows for a greater intensity in private, which is something which I think has been lost in the modern world. And we can see that in the decline in the number of young men having sex, for example, because it's so available. It's no longer got that magnetic charge. Whereas here we're getting it kind of veiled to us, so we can imagine it being even more powerful behind the scenes, as it were. So I do think there's,
really
and I think the Victorian has that as well, and it kind of it's so kind of hidden away that it almost breaks out in some of the pre-Raphaelite artists that we might come to later, in a very powerful way.
But I think that's such a good point, and I wonder, like I'm very much a believer in these kind of moments of harmony, like cultural harmony between time and between peoples, and I think. The Victorians and the medievals, there was clearly this huge resonance because of, the way that society was set up at that time, plus the peoples themselves, meant that they just like all of this stuff really like hit them in a way that it hadn't hit for hundreds of years in the same kind of way. And it's interesting as we kind of move forward into kind of high Renaissance period, there's going to be a huge drought of Arthur content from literally the 1500s till the 1800s, really, which ties into that more Rubenesque form of eroticism, and I wonder if there's almost like a bit of a cultural switch that's going off, where if you're in this kind of louche, think about the French again, for example, whatever Louis the 15th Sun King style court or whatever, their eroticism and like sexual energy is like, again, very out in the open, and very unmedieval like. So it's not, these stories are not going to resonate with those people at those time, maybe. Anyway, let's quickly finish off these last bits of the Gothic. We've got Tristan and Isolde here, and I think this is after like there's a couple of moments where I think Tristan gets hurt and then she heals him again, and obviously Mark eventually kills him. But I think in some cases he also just like wounds him and then he dies in her arms, kind of thing, and then she kills herself.
That's right, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I just love again the faces here. They're kind of gaunt, anemic, a little head cap hiding Mark's wounds, and she is almost as affected as he is, even though he is the mortal blow. And then I love just like Mark in the background just being like, just as his expression just brilliant, kind of like, oh, she's the worst. She's the worst.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be. I know it looks like the wounded situation, but it's almost reenacting when he first discovers their tryst as well. When he gives the wound, it's like, oh, what have I come into here? This is awful. How did this happen? She was so in love with me.
How did this happen? That's such a good point. One thing I wanted to mention as well, in terms of subject matter and themes, the last couple of bits we've seen are all Tristan and Isolde as well, and that's also interesting. Lancelot basically seems to go out of favour for the 1400s. So again, we've got this subject matter changing in terms of popularity at the same time. I think because Lancelot was such a practical, such a practical character. It's basically Arthur and Tristram survive it during that mythic period more, if I'm honest with you. And I wonder whether it's because it's less about acts of heroism and more kind of like certainly again the Grail stories are super popular as well. So again I think there's that kind of Christian virtue and idea of finding something bigger. I think with Arthur it's about again a great almost kind of like Carlylean great man thing. And
Mm.
then I think where Tristan comes in is it's the love story. It's kind of like I think Lancelot almost becomes a bit unappealing as a story because it is like you can't have the narrative of Arthur as great man and Arthur as cupped loser, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I wonder why Tristan is it's a similar story, but it's like it's happening to an unworthy to an unworthy king at the same time. So it's kind of like it's not so bad. So I wonder whether that's why in this kind of last high Gothic period, there's been that shift in terms of what's been interesting. But we've got one last piece here, and this is actually a little bit later, but it's thought that it's created a little bit earlier, and again another really interesting cultural object. And this is actually in the V&A, I think. It's a salt cellar made out, known as the Burley Neff, which is a type of ship. It's made out of a nautilus shell, which has been kind of wrapped around with gold, and it's one of these kind of intricate objects that would sit on like a fabulous and beautiful table, feasting table. This kind of central object, and I mean, I think we need to bring these back because just imagine just dropping. Dropping. Oh, by the way, this is my salt cellar, guys. This is what I keep my salt in.
It'd be amazing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But obviously, we've got this beautiful ship, mermaid at the top. But who is under the mast? Well, it's only Tristan and Isolde playing chess in a tiny version, and so their story still lived on relatively late. Although I would say this is kind of like this is the last true Arthurian story that we're going to see for a couple of 100 years now. So another really beautiful artwork, and again that the story of lovers transcending through time. But we've finished the Gothic section, and I wonder whether we want to call it a day now before we start anything else, if that's okay.
That's fine, and we'll do the rest of the period in another video, which will appear at some point. But yeah, I think that's been a really great kind of deep dive into the development of the historic and romantic or romance art, I should say, and many of the themes that we've seen, how they've developed. I think it's been quite interesting, and the artistic styles along with that. Before we kind of wrap up this episode, then, Farah, is there anything you would like to kind of say by way of closing as to these periods that we've looked at?
Well, I think it's really interesting because it's we've kind of gone through like almost like the contemporary periods to where these works have started and there's this instant reaction. It's not like often today there'll be an artist who dies and then is discovered afterwards or whatever. People at the time loved the works and wanted to create art off the back of it. I think it was interesting that it's definitely literature first, but as these kind of scenes and themes developed, they're kind of going around different crafts at the same time and evolving, like we saw with Lancelot on the Sword Bridge, for example. It's a definite format that everyone's following, but then doing slight tweaks and improvements at the same time. So there is this kind of like almost scenic tradition that happens. We've seen how different motifs and stories and themes are changing at different historical periods that resonate with the elites and the patrons who are paying for these things as well. Do not underestimate their importance with the artistic creation process. They're driving that. They're the ones saying. A lot of the times it is literally a guy saying, "I want you to do a version of this book for me. I want you to make this salt cellar." And I think most of all, I think it just reflects this Gothic character of again the love of the supernatural, the love of reality versus unreality, the love of livable heroic figures, There's again, it's all about unattainability and attainability. It's like almost like that I always think about that Grail vision or whatever. It's almost there in front of us. We can almost see it, but we can't touch it. And that's constantly in the Gothic mind, I think, in a way that doesn't happen at any other time. And also, again, this it's not just about art as we call it today. It's art and craft working in tandem as well. Like we've seen it in on the caskets, in the carvings, in the cultural objects, as well as the illuminations at the same time, all working together in a way that we won't see as we kind of hit the Renaissance and the Victorian period.
I think that's a great way to close. So all that remains for me to say is thank you, Pharaoh, for guiding us through several hundred years of history. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. And stay tuned because there'll be more about Arthurian art throughout Arthur Day. So thank you very much.